Welcome to Zentiva Sustainability Podcast. At Zentiva, we believe that each and every one of us can contribute to taking care of our planet and do what we can to protect it so that future generations can enjoy life as much as we do. We act today for a sustainable tomorrow, and as part of our environmental pathway, we find it important to educate and empower our associates, and we warmly invite you to join us and follow our new initiative, the Zentiva Sustainability Podcast, with a series of episodes where experts explain different areas of environmental protection. Today, we're going to talk about bees because, as we found out, there are many things that we regular people don't know about these little creatures who make our lives sweeter with their delicious honey. One of them is how crucial they are for our existence and how many challenges they're facing in modern environments. It's my pleasure to welcome our today's guest, Dr. Alexandra Harmon-Threet. She's an associate professor in the Department of Entomology at the University of Illinois and is currently a Fulbright Scholar at Charles University at Prague. Her specialty is bees, and that's exactly what we will talk about today. So welcome, Alexandra, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to talk about bees always.
So, studying bees, what exactly does that entail?
Despite us knowing how important bees are for our existence, we actually know very little about the bees themselves. We know that there are 20,000 species, and that means that there's a lot of space for us to learn things about them. Where do they live? What environments do they enjoy? How do they respond to things like pesticides and climate change? There's a multitude of questions that we still are asking every day.
All right, so what do we actually know about bees? So we've heard that there are a lot of things that we don't know. What do we know?
So we know that, again, there are 20,000 species. So we learn a lot about honeybees, often in the media and classrooms, but there are lots of other species and they have very interesting biology. Many of them live in nests below ground. Rather than having a queen, often a single female is making and provisioning her nest on her own. They can also have other kinds of sociality where they live communally, or they live where just a few of them are sexual reproductives and the others are not. We know that they like lots of different environments. They live in the desert, they live in the tropics, they live in temperate environments. And we also know that they are really sensitive to environmental stressors. So many of the things that I'm sure people are concerned about, climate change, loss of habitat, contamination of habitat, these things are really affecting their population sizes.
And could you specify some of the challenges that the bees are facing in the modern environments?
Yeah, so we've been recently learning a lot about how they respond to climate change. So many larger bees are really struggling, and climate change also seems to be making bees smaller. A smaller bee is going to be able to move smaller distances, and that could have both good and bad. Could mean good things for the bees, but it could mean bad things for pollination. They also, many of their environments are contaminated with pesticides, and because we need them in agricultural systems to pollinate many of our crops, we need them to be able to persist in those environments. And so agrochemicals can be really challenging for them. But one of the biggest challenges, it seems, is habitat loss. Our dominance as humans means that there's less and less habitat for all wild creatures, but bees especially. And so we need to be able to provide them with the resources that they need to be able to persist.
What can we imagine as such habitat or like loss of habitat? It's a little bit abstract when you're not really into the topic. So could you explain a little more?
Yeah, exactly. I'm happy to. So originally, humans did not live in such large cities where we cultivated large fields. That means that there's fewer wild places, grasslands and forests for the bees to live naturally. And that loss of habitat means that there's just very little opportunity for them to complete their life cycle. There's less resources for them, less flowers available, less places for them to place their nests. And that really affects their ability to grow and thrive in environments. And so most often when we're concerned about bees, we suggest to people is to try and save land and make that land suitable for pollinators or bees specifically. That includes making sure there are lots of plants for them, lots of flowering plants, that those flowering plants bloom across the whole year, because that's always a challenge, is that many times there are not enough early blooming plants or late blooming plants. And so that means many species struggle, particularly the spring species that are going to be highly impacted by climate change. And then making sure that the habitats are not continuously contaminated with chemicals, making sure that there's open places in the soil for them to nest. I often discourage people from using things like mulch in their home gardening, because that means that there's less available places for bees to nest.
All right, thank you. And could you maybe explain a little more why regular humans should be concerned about bees and their loss of habitats and the challenges that they face? What could be the impact that we can feel?
Absolutely. So bees are responsible for the majority of pollination for both crops, but then also for wildflowers. And so it's very easy for us to understand that if crops don't get pollinated, that means the delicious foods that we like to eat, we won't have them, right? And even foods that maybe don't flower, like I know that cabbage is very popular here in the Czech Republic, but we need cabbage seeds in order to propagate the crops over and over again. And so many species that we need to eat flower and fruit, and without pollinators, many of them cannot. Like I said, many wildflowers also struggle. And while wildflowers maybe don't seem as important, if you think about the seeds of wildflowers are often eaten by birds. The plants of wildflowers are often eaten by other insects and maybe even mammals that we are concerned about. And so as plants aren't able to set seed, that affects both our food production, but then also our entire ecosystems. We stand to lose many other species if plants can't properly propagate or make seed for themselves. So it's really important to have pollinators in the environment, and bees are the biggest pollinator for most plants.
That sounds like we should really care.
Yeah.
And make sure that they are happy and they have places where to nest and to thrive. What about some misconceptions about bees that you encounter when you talk to people about them?
I think the biggest is that bees are often confused with wasps. Now, they are very closely related to wasps, but often when people say, oh, I was chased by these bees, they're often talking about wasps or hornets. And so most bees are actually not that interested in us. Yes, if you knock over a honeybee nest, there probably will be some consequences. But most other pollinators, because they live individually, they're just really not that interested in us. You can even pet them on flowers, or many actually can't sting or are not very good at stinging, or the stings actually don't hurt very much. And so I think that's one misconception, is that many people assume, oh, I've been stung, it must have been by bees. But oftentimes it's actually by wasps or hornets. And I think the other is that all bees have similar biology to honeybees. The honeybees are actually interesting because they provide us with honey, and we love that. But they also have a very obscure biology. They're very different from most other bee species. Their social structure, where you have a queen and many, many workers, the fact that their hives get very large, the fact that they live year round, all of these things are like pretty not very characteristic of most other bee species.
Okay, so what can each of us personally do to help the bees?
My biggest suggestion to people is, if any space that they have available to them, if it's a garden or maybe they own some land somewhere, is to cultivate habitat that's good for bees. That means reducing their agrochemical use, no pesticides, even reducing herbicides if you can. Planting things that are going to flower all year long. Also really focusing on native plant species if they can. Many plants that are cultivated have reduced nectar or pollen production, and so that means that they're less benefit to the bees. And making sure that there is bare available habitat for them to potentially nest in. So reducing mulch use, reducing lots of heavy stone use in landscaping and things like that. And those things really seem to help bees move into your habitats and live there, hopefully happily for many years.
Well, let's hope that anyone who has a garden will try some of those tips. And let's hope that also cities and parks are doing things like that. Thank you very much for sharing all this interesting information with us. We are sure that today we've contributed to bring more awareness around this topic that is so important that we keep it alive. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.